We actually begin with you we start talking about articles with a few points which are like common knowledge, right? And which will enable us to proceed into a bit more complicated cases. So we are going to discuss with you today what articles are genuinely for. We will revise some basic rules and contextual use of articles, because actually we do of course understand with you that the use of articles, especially in academic writing, right, is sometimes extremely unpredictable, and there are often no clear rules, and we literally have just to fill it, because articles, what I love about them, are one of those means which enable us to establish certain relationship between the author and the reader, which is absolutely important. And there are several means which allow us to do that, right? And these are models and various means of hedging, right? And articles as well, because articles are meaningful and they're really impactful in terms of creating certain context and in terms of responding to the context which the author actually creates. And of course, we will make a conclusion and you will help me in that. I collected here a few opinions of my students. I don't mean school students, because I'm mentoring students and postgraduate students who study at the HSE and at MSU and in some other universities. And actually that was the opinion. So when asked what are articles for, the majority of my postgraduate students replied that articles are used, actually exist in the English language just to confuse even the smartest non-native speakers. This opinion was especially popular among representatives of hard sciences. If we speak about humanities, right? Students who belong to humanities, they replied to make English more complicated, which they liked actually. Now, to modify nouns was the answer of the linguists. And to help clarify the meaning of the noun in your sentence was actually only 2 students answered like that, because they did something like a course paper on articles, and that's why for them it was a little bit, right, more obvious. So speaking about articles, I think that each of you has your own concept of what articles exist for and what are articles used for, because somehow you have to explain it to yourself. Otherwise, it will be simply impossible to make use of them. I also love the definition which I found on the website of the University of Western Australia. The guidelines, right, began with the following phrase: articles are 3 tricky words. And for me, this is just the best definition ever, because yes, these are those 3 tricky words, the, a, and an, which are actually two forms of one and the same verb. And actually, I would definitely say that these are the words which can completely change the meaning of the sentence. And we will make sure we understand why and what way during today's session. So let me tell you that if you're unsure when to use those words, right, you are not alone. And next, we are going actually to speak about just a few basic rules. I think that you do remember some of the rules, because rules are always good because they can be somehow memorized. They are not applied to practice though. But anyway, when you remember them, it gives you some kind of confidence, the feeling of security. And first of all, let's speak about so-called rules of thumb. So, of course, you remember, I think, that we use a and an after the verb to be, right? In construction, there is the ra, and with have and have got. When we speak about various occupations, when it's the first time that we've mentioned something, right? And we use the when we have already mentioned what we are talking about, when there is only one of something in superlative expressions with particular adjectives. I would like to draw your attention to the use of articles which is grammatically determined, right? I mean, the use of articles in superlative expressions, for example. Here, the the grammatical function like domineers over the function which determines the meaning. And the same with particular adjectives like the same, for example, right, the whole, and so on. These are very easy cases because they allow us just to use the articles automatically. Now it's your turn, actually. What rules in terms of articles do you remember? Again, try to bring up everything that you can in your mind. So there are also sub rules. You remember them. So, for example, we use and with the sense of every in expression of time. For example, when we say about quantity or time, we use that to speak about leisure activities or various forms of entertainment. Of course, we use that in the names of items in particular categories, and also there is a series of expressions when no article is used, like to have lunch, right? We know that in time expressions, we don't use articles. We know that when we speak about abstract nouns, or when we speak about particular institutions, we also don't use articles, and so on. But if we speak about those rules of thumb, right, and the sub rules, there are always a lot of exceptions to them, and we also know that. And this is something which is always extremely confusing, because you can learn the rule, but with the rules, but keep using articles incorrectly. And this is what makes them so very hard to percept. I know people who, and of course you also know people, maybe you belong to this category of people who know all the rules and all the exceptions. Does it make their writing better? I would not say so, because in academic writing, when it is you who create the context itself, and you set the rules and the relationship with the reader, and you speak about, you interpret, you present your interpretation of certain research, of the results, right, and so on, it is really very hard to apply the rules which in common practice, in everyday practice, right, are more connected to some things like geographical names, names of the meal. Do we speak about names of the meals when we speak about the academic context? Hardly. Maybe it's possible, but the area will be very restricted. Actually, I think we don't even often use various expressions of times. We don't speak about leisure activities or whatever. And that's why all the rules, they are applicable in our context. But at the same time, there are many more cases in which we are to rely on our feeling. But in fact, it's not the feeling, it's the knowledge and the real understanding of what articles actually mean and what meaning we can attribute to them, right? Directing the reader into the environment of our context, right? Rather than on the rules which actually turn out to be, in the majority of cases, like meaningless. Nevertheless, I believe that it's still absolutely possible for you right now to evaluate how relevant are the rules which I've just mentioned for your academic writing practice. Try to identify your the way you use the articles, right, in within these 4 options which we suggested. Yeah, still the most popular option is that you do have some algorithms. This is good. I wish you could evaluate also. I didn't include this, but I wish I had done it actually, right? I didn't include it, but that would be really great to know to what extent your algorithm really helps. How much, how often are the articles edited or corrected by the editors when, for example, you prepare an article for publication? So we can see that 50% of people present here, right, do have their own algorithm. This is great. And Still 21% know the rules, but they're not applicable, right? And I hope that still in this case, some algorithms do work, because when you have a lot of practice, right? And when you use articles in a particular environment, even via with the help of reading, right? A lot of literature, right? A lot of articles, a lot of materials on your topic, you still get used to these algorithms. You start feeling the articles. This is really so. I don't remember any rules and use articles randomly. 15% is a lot, I would say. And also 15% have their own vision. And this is great, because whenever you have your own vision of the articles and use them accordingly, actually, it's not about having some algorithm, right? This is rather about your own understanding of the articles, and again, using them. I wouldn't say randomly, but I love this, your own vision of the article and using them accordingly. This is really great. I try to take text from different topics, so that to show the use of articles in different contexts. And what I love, there is also one more thing, that it's that actually, I would definitely say that articles are a means to show at least some emotions, and we will see it today in one of the exercises, to show emotions, right? The emotional aspect in academic writing, which is a very rare case. Though we know that actually the modern trend is to tell the reader a story, no matter how sometimes dry or factual our academic context is, right? Nevertheless, just for me, what is interesting in academic writing is a story, this story told, or a story told, speaking about the articles, by the way. All right, now let's move on. So if we speak about basic rules, I would definitely say that to introduce the concept of using articles in academic writing, I would definitely mention four key factors, right, which are listed here. So the use of articles mainly depends on the meaning that we want them to convey, and that we want the noun which they define to convey. It's some kind of shared knowledge, so it's what we want to tell people about. It's the context, and in this case, we speak not about various types of academic contexts, right? But we speak about the context that the author actually creates. And of course, singular, plural nouns. This is the most understandable part, in my opinion, the most understandable part about articles, though we will start not with singular, plural nouns, because it will take us a little bit longer time. So first of all, let's speak about shared knowledge. What is meant by shared knowledge is the fact which the case that we can see on the example of these two sentences. So first of all, could you please read through the sentences, right, and try to explain why we use article A in these cases, in both cases, right, and why is it the most appropriate thing, and then what this shared knowledge is about. So if we speak about neoliberal approach, right, has been dominant for international development knowledge and ingrained in international developmental organizations, right? In this case, we actually use article A because in this case, we use an adjective before a noun, right? We have approach, and it's a typical situation in which we actually use a before such a combination. At the same time, I would definitely say that article A here has one more function, right? Because it introduces the approach, which will be discussed further on, as one of those approaches, right? Which is actually which in this case, we speak about the dominant one, in the context which is continued further on. So this is the beginning of the article, and that's why the use of "a" in this case is absolutely like understandable. So shared knowledge, when we want to share something, when we mention it for the first time, right, when we just start speaking, it's not the common context yet. And that's why in this case, we use article "a" just to introduce the concept, which is expressed, I underline it, by a countable noun, because "a" and are used only with countable nouns, right? And likewise, we can see absolutely the same thing. Recently, a technology known as Raman tweezers, right, which is an inverted microscope coupled to a Raman spectrometer, has been introduced. Again, we just introduced this technology, right? The reader knows nothing about it. So when we speak about shared knowledge, this is actually the introduction of some concept of an idea, technology, method, the subject of our research, whatever, right, in the context which will become further on common between for the author and for the reader. And that's why, in my opinion, there is not it is not a difficult like concept to understand, because the main thing to understand here is actually to grasp the idea of countable and uncountable nouns, I believe. But we will see further on. Now, if we speak about meaning, articles do really help us understand the meaning of the object that we are talking about. And if we compare with you the following examples, right, we can see that in this sentence, the price of a product will not change, right, if there is equilibrium between the supply and the demand for that product. And in this case, it's kind of, again, this shared knowledge, but there is also a special meaning in it. In comparison, let's have a look at the second slide, right? In comparison with the same sentence, but in which "the" is used, the price of the product will not change if there is equilibrium between the supply and the demand for the product, we can definitely see that it's not just the shared knowledge and like something that we already know about. It's different. The price of a product, the price of the product, right? In the first case, we speak about some kind of general rule, right? Any product, it can be even not any product, right, which is given to us, right, which we somehow speak about, but a product in general. So this can be the rule applicable to any type of product. While in the second one, we speak already about a particular situation. We are definitely speaking about something, right, that our research, for example, is focused on. And the price of their product may be up as opposed to the price of other products, right, will not change if there is equilibrium, and so on and so forth. And that's why in this example, we can clearly see the meaning, right, the change of the meaning. So applicable to anything or to everything, and applicable only to a particular category. I would say that sometimes it really plays a paramount role in the interpretation of the sentence and of the, for example, of the concept itself, because again, particularizing, right, is really important in terms of the interpretation of what we want to say. Why the demand and the supply? If we come back to this sentence, right, the supply and the demand for that product will be the same, right? If we speak about this, for example, right, sentence and a product here, actually the supply and the demand refer more to the second part of the sentence for that product. So for the product which is already which we already discussed in a particular situation. And I would definitely say that here we speak about the supply and the demand for the product, right, which will be under the discussion. And that's why, again, that is so very crucial sometimes, because not sometimes, but always crucial, because it actually defines whether we are speaking about a particular situation, like in this case, or we are speaking about the concept in general, like in the first part of this sentence. And that's what is important. Specific demand, supply for this, absolutely right. Yeah, if we speak about, by the way, if we speak about abstract nouns, right, with abstract nouns, we don't often use articles in general. right? You understand that even if I take just the most common abstract noun like love, for example, which we don't often use in academic context, but which is so very common when we speak about everyday context, can I say the love? Can I say the Petrov? And what about some particular situation? For example, I will never forget the love, and then I give the definition, for example. It's, or there was, look, that's the Petrov I told you about. It's possible. And the meaning might be derogative, but it might be also just particularizing, specifying, right? And that's why it's all possible. Everything is possible if we speak about articles. The main thing is still the meaning and the context. In this case, again, I will come back to this idea about abstract nouns. Usually, and if you read any grammar book, right, any good grammar book especially, you will definitely see that abstract nouns are commonly used without articles. But in a specific situation, and exactly in academic writing, we most often come across such contexts, such such a context actually, right? I would definitely say that the use of abstract nouns with the, right, it's impossible to use am because they are uncountable, but still the use of the with abstract nouns is, I would say, common. Now, let's have a look at the next part, right? Countable, uncountable nouns. In this case, we speak about uncountable singular nouns, which we very often use in academic writing. So, in fact, in this case, we are to identify the nouns that can be plural. The nouns that can be plural, there can be several options, by the way, because you understand that there are nouns which can be either only plural, like experience, for example. It can be uncountable, but in another meaning, in the other meaning, by the way, right, it will be countable. But there are nouns which are always uncountable, or vice versa, always countable. So again, this is one of the things I enjoy so much in the English language. The flexibility, right, the adaptability of vocabulary and grammar is absolutely amazing because it fits in the context, right? So that enable us to give us an opportunity to express what we want. So as we can see, industry was word number one, 87% consider it to be countable. You are right. As for degradation, I can hardly imagine a situation in which degradation can be countable. Though, again, there are always exceptions to all rules because context rules the rules, so to put it, right? You know, I will give you a very simple example, which is not maybe related to the nouns, but you all know definitely that the verb to want is never used in continuous form. No, it is. And if you listen to very educated and really knowledgeable people, right, native speakers, you can definitely hear from time to time, I am wanting, right, is used. The same with countable, uncountable nouns. And the word, for example, experience, which initially was uncountable, but then the meaning shifted and it got its countable version, right, which means like a case, a happening, an event. As for the word consumption, hardly possible that consumption can be used as a countable noun. The word species is countable, actually. It's always countable, but it belongs to a specific category of nouns like means or species. The two most common words are means and species, which contain this S letter, but it's not a plural ending. We say a species, many species. So it's countable, but it doesn't change its form containing this S letter, which is extremely confusing for us because we know that there is, for example, such a word as news, which also has this letter, which also doesn't mean the plural form, but which is always uncountable and which is always singular. Supply can be countable. Degradation, no, it cannot be countable. Landfill actually is like rubbish dump, and that's why it's definitely countable. And waste can have two different meanings, right? And that's why in one of them, waste is uncountable, and wastes, meaning different kinds of for example, organic waste, which we can recycle, right? Yes, in this case, it's countable. Now, we have some doubts about the words like production, demand, packaging, but still there are people who think that they can be plural, right? We have big doubts about the word food and about the word growth. All right. Value, resource, no questions about them. Yes, they are countable. All right. Now, as for the word food, let me comment on it at once, because actually the word food can be countable. It's we are used to the fact that it's uncountable, but in fact, it has the second meaning, which is products. And that's why, yes, of course, you can use it as a countable one, like foods. Foods in American shops are extremely cheap. Or, for example, like in whatever context we take it, when food means products, right? Means products, then it can be countable easily. Again, everything depends, in fact, on the meaning. Again, on the meaning of the word. The countable nouns, which can be plural and singular, and which require a article before them, an article, actually, right? In this case, it will be a. So it's, of course, is absolutely true about species, landfill, habitat, because there can be habitats, right, to which different species of animals, for example, or of plants belong. Resources, definitely. Value, definitely. And growth, it's really, it might sound really like discombobulating, right, confusing, but growth can be countable. Especially if we compare different trends, right, different tendencies, then we can speak about growth of different products. I don't think that it sounds, by the way, it doesn't sound good in speaking, but it does look good in writing. And that's why it's one of the words which was which is recommended to be used in formal register, right, which belongs to formal register. And that's why actually it can be easily used as a countable noun. Uncountable, which can never be plural, right? Consumption, definitely. Degradation, waste, and packaging. Though I wouldn't say that waste, which I put it that I put here, right, is uncountable. This is definitely a mistake, and it's I think that it's my mistake initially, because waste can be used as a countable noun. If we speak about both, waste should belong there to the third column, actually. Supply, industry, demand, production, and food. They can be both countable and uncountable, right? And waste should definitely go there as well, because again, waste can be used as though in both meaning. So again, you can see that from the point of view, even of countable and uncountable nouns, right? Our perception of the meaning of the nouns can vary a lot, and the way the reader interprets our concept also belongs on the articles that we use, because by means of the articles we actually give the reader, or like direct the reader into our understanding of the meaning of the word. So what we mean is actually explained by the article itself. Coming back, making it clear about the word waste. So the word waste cannot be given in the singular form. I think that's why I actually put it, no, it was a mistake. So as for the word waste should definitely be put into both, can be plural, because the word waste is I mean, it cannot be singular. I cannot say a waste, but I can definitely use wastes in the plural form, right? For example, wastes are a large area of land, for example, like a desert, right? These are called wastes as well, but it cannot be used in the plural form, and it can be, of course, its major meaning is uncountable. That is it, just for you not to be confused, right, by the interpretation that I put. Then let's somehow sum up. So we use an with singular countable nouns, and by means of that, we show that something is not common ground between us and the reader, for example, right? And we like announce that we introduce something new, something unexpected, maybe something that the reader is unaware of. Uncountable nouns do not require any articles. I mean, indefinite articles, an. Now, I want I will ask you in the handout. You have it in task 1. So I will ask you to read the sentences which are given to us, and the sentence actually, right? And could you please try to find places for 2 indefinite articles, either A or N? By the way, I have a question. I have a question about the word knowledge in terms of countable, uncountable. Can I say a knowledge? It's an extra question for you to think about. In the sentence, by the way, I can give you a sentence that we require a specialist with a knowledge of French and knowledges of PC and say and something else. Actually, knowledge can be countable. When we speak about knowledges of some specific spheres, right? Knowledges in specific spheres. In this case, knowledge is closer to the word skill, and that's why by its meaning, and that's why a knowledge is a possible thing. Absolutely. So knowledge can be uncountable and countable. Let me show you the key, all right? So knowledge, in this case, we mean in general, knowledge is all facts, right? Of the physical chemical properties of a potential chemical alternative is a requirement of the alternatives assessment process for 2 reasons. In this case, we need with you a here because we speak not about all alternatives, right? But about one alternative only. And it is a requirement of the process because there can be some other requirements. So again, in this case, it's just a typical situation when we just share the conditions which are compulsory, right, for our research or for the experiment, for conducting the experiment, for example. And that's why in this case, we speak about a potential chemical alternative and a requirement as just the introduction, as some of the ideas introduced in this text before in this text before the description of the whole process. Because of course, afterwards it would be the potential chemical alternative and the requirement, no doubt about that. Now, of course, we cannot use, in this case, we don't use the knowledge because knowledge in this case means information. So when the meaning of knowledge is information, right, and the acquired information, then we don't use it as a countable noun. And there was also a question about the knowledge of the, right? Yes. So in fact, when we have this of phrase, right, we can really use the in such a situation. It would be the knowledge and the requirement. In case we mean only the knowledge of these properties and the only requirement of the alternative assessment process, right? Which will change the context completely, which will change the message completely. Because if I speak about a requirement, it means that further on, I will also consider a few more requirements. But if in for my research, for the experiment, for example, that I conduct, or for the survey which I conduct, there is only one requirement necessary, then I would definitely use the. Because there is also a very important thing. There is the verb to be. The verb to be is the so-called rule of thumb, right? Which means that it is like commonly accepted that after the verb to be, we usually use a. But again, coming back to the idea that the use of articles is, especially in the text that we create, depend very much on what we want to say. That is possible there, but only in the meaning, the only requirement which we need. And in this case also the knowledge, right? Which means that only this part of information is required, and that is all. So again, this is, by the way, that's why I say that it's so very important to understand what is meant by each article, because if you have the meaning of the only, but further on, you will give some more requirements, right? It will sound illogical, and it will lead to the ambiguity, which will actually confuse the reader and maybe, right, may lead to misunderstanding or misinterpretation of your research in general. That is it. So let's have a look at that. Here, I just underlined the cases where there can be an article. So I give you some time to think it over. And again, let's think about the way we will explain it. Okay, so let's see. First, the inherent hazard of a chemical, such as its capacity to interfere with normal biological processes and its physical hazards and environmental fate, degradation, persistence, are determined. So the inherent hazard, we have the example, right, such as its capacity and so on, and that's why we definitely need here the article. Though, again, there can be a context in which, of course, it would be an inherent hazard, no doubt about that. One more thing, of a chemical, in this case, it means of any chemical, in general, yes, that's it. Now, of course, it's necessary to understand that environmental fate in this case is uncountable, as well as degradation and persistence. And that's why if we have a look at the initial sentence, right, just a moment, over here, right, we have one noun which is countable, and it's a chemical. Again, the meaning will be any chemical in general, whatever chemical we take. Again, if we speak about the particular chemical and the object of our research, for example, and the focus of the article that we are writing is only one chemical, of course, it can be that. But there can be no situation in which there will be no article, because chemical is a countable noun, and that's the main thing. At the same time, whilst, for example, environmental fate, degradation, and persistence, they will be most often used without any articles, right? Article, because only the is possible here, because they are abstract nouns which are uncountable, and that's why we don't use there any like determinants, right? Any defining words like the, for example. Why don't we write the environmental fate and its physical habits and environmental its, right? In this case, as well as in its capacity and its physical hazard, it refers to a chemical. The role of pronouns is also utterly important, and the role of pronouns is directly connected to the role of articles and nouns. This is the coordination which we need to observe, and this is also one of the most common mistakes, to be honest, when we create texts. Now, why not its physical hazards and the environmental fate, degradation and persistence are determined. In fact, I would say that there is, environmental fate is not specified. I mean, environmental fate it's environmental fate in general, because except for degradation and persistence, there can be some other options. Though I would agree with you that there is no etc. And that's why we can say that it's kind of specified. And that's why in this case, I would say that it's up to you to decide whether to use the or not, whether to say the environmental fate, like, for example, degradation and persistence, but I would not use it just because, not to overload the text, because in this case, I don't feel that it is absolutely necessary, because I don't mean to say the fate which is given to the two options which I give in the brackets, because I give them only as an example, not I, but the author, I think, of the text, because of course I took all of these examples from like a very many articles which I studied for this for this session. All right, now let's move on. And now, in this case, in task 3, we are to use either no article or an. Again, of course, there will be some kind of temptation to use the. We'll discuss such cases as well. Just, I will explain my kind of excitement when I saw Natalia's variant, right, which was given in the chat, because before it, there was a research, but research is uncountable. And this there will be definitely but it refers to the word body. And that's why a research body, it's also extremely necessary, right, to realize the fact that noun plus noun combinations in the English language are absolutely common. And in this case, once again, I underline it, research will determine, like identify the noun body. It will be like an adjective. And that's why a research, just for you not to remember that research can be used with a, because in Russian it is so. And this interference of the Russian language over the English language, right, is is absolutely powerful. And that's why research is always uncountable. But in this case, we mean the body. So let's have a look at the key. So we consider efficiency. Efficiency is uncountable of a mechanism for incentivizing publication in academic journals where a research supervisory body awards points for papers that appear in quality publications. That's it. That will be the correct one. Of course, we can say, to predict your question, we consider the efficiency. Yes, it's possible. But again, for me here, it would be like some kind of overloaded text unless I see the context. If in the context, this the is necessary, let me explain to you at once in what case we will definitely need the before efficiency. The point is that the very often is used when we oppose two notions, two concepts, when there is some kind of contradiction between, and we compare, for example, the efficiency of one mechanism and the efficiency of the other mechanism of another mechanism. That's the point. In this case, the efficiency will be absolutely necessary. But in this case, it's not a must. It's not compulsory. So again, to summarize, we use the with a noun. I'm very sorry if you like kind of get confused when I pronounce the, but it's like to underline, right, that it's the definite article. So we use the definite article with any noun, countable or uncountable, sometimes abstract nouns, of course, to refer either backwards, which is very important, or forwards in a text or conversation, and also to refer to our shared experience, which has already been shared, right, or some general knowledge. Uncountable nouns might require the, right, or no article depending on the context. So what is meant by to refer backwards or forwards in a text or conversation? This is already, backwards is exactly something that has already been mentioned. Forwards, this is, for example, when we speak about the subject of our research, which we are going to consider further on, and then it will be the subject, right, of course, because our paper is devoted to it. And this is like referring forwards, but we will see it with you in some examples in the text which follow. Okay, now let's have a look at the following. Now it's high time we tried using a, an, the, or no article. In this case, there might be a question, we will discuss it, whether the definite article is used, whether you use the definite article to like compare the system to the system. Let's have a look at the text itself. So first of all, it sets up, you think, a reward system, right? Because system is countable. Maximize the objective function of a research supervisory body. Though I have a question here, whether this of can refer to any research supervisory body or to one of research supervisory bodies. Do you think that it can be in this context? It can be meant, right? Because we try to predict right now. We don't see the complete text, and we try to predict right now. Is it generally possible that there can be several research supervisory bodies in one institution, for example, though their submission decisions, right? The model is calibrated to a reward scheme. We had such an option, the reward scheme introduced within. We had an option, the Polish higher education, a Polish higher education, and simply Polish higher education. Higher education reform, mind you, that it refers not to the Polish higher education, but it refers to the reform, for which the series of policy recommendations is given. And now you might have changed your mind while I was just giving the option and some of the comments. Now let's have a look at the key. So it sets up, this is the shared knowledge. We introduce a reward system. It sets up a reward system. No specification is given further on, and that's why it will be a, so that researchers who are aiming to maximize their own rewards also maximize the objective function of the research supervisory body. Why the research supervisory body? I have already given a version why, right? Because it's hardly possible that there will be several research supervisory bodies. And that's why it's very likely that there is only one. And that's why the is used. And the same, the objective function, because it maximizes exactly the objective function of the research supervisory body. For me, it does really sound more logical, because I can hardly imagine that we, in this context, so to maximize their own rewards and also maximize a particular function of the research body, and being objective is the major function of any research supervisory body. Then through their submission decisions, then a reward system, right, which is set up, is exactly the model which is calibrated to the reward system, right? So these two are interconnected, and that's why it will be the model is calibrated to the reward system introduced within, and that's why I drew your attention to the fact that Polish higher education reform in 2018 is the key to this definite article, the, because in this case it's specified, right? Which reform of higher education? The one which took place in 2018. And that's why it's impossible to use it without any article, because reform is countable, and it's impossible to use here a Polish higher education reform because it's specified, for which a series of policy, just a moment. Recommendations, right, is given. Yes, that's it. In my understanding, I try to choose an excerpt, right, from from the article which I took. I tried to choose the excerpt in which the text will be absolutely clear. And in my understanding, every article here can be explained by this context. And they create the meaning. If I change the articles here, the meaning will be completely different, and it will be extremely confusing and ambiguous. Now we come over to the word, to the notion, which I have already mentioned so many times, and it's the context. So the next factor, because we spoke with you about 4 factors, right? And what it seems to me that the major one is, of course, the context. So the context, again, I asked my undergraduate students and postgraduate students, what is context for them in terms of academic writing? Here are the answers. So first of all, context is the information that helps the message of a text make sense. And then context includes the environment of a particular subject area, the genres, which are relatable to this area, and approaches to presenting research in a particular subject area. And there is also one more definition, which these are not definitions themselves, of course, right? But these are like the ways we interpret what context is for us when we speak, especially when we speak about articles, right? Context determines the relationship between the author and the reader. For me, this is the the best definition of the context, because for me, again, when I create a text, no matter what genre the text belongs to, especially in academic writing, where we have such a limited, a restricted kit of means, right, to establish those relationships and to somehow hint the reader on what we want to say, right, and what our attitude to everything is. Actually, the final definition, right, sounds best for me. Though I agree, all of the things which are mentioned here, right, they all work in terms of creating context and in terms of understanding articles within the use of articles and the role of articles within this context. So for me, this is one of the maybe it's the key factor. It's the out of the 4 factors, right? For me, it's the main one. So let's have a look at the examples. So if we speak about examples, right, we can definitely say that before we have a look at them, right, but using English articles correctly is considered one of the most challenging aspects. This is we know. And I again wanted to underline here that actually the informal writing article usage can be extremely unpredictable, and it is very personalized, you know, as we have already seen, right, in the examples which we have just studied with you, right? I would definitely say that idiosyncrasy is one of the characteristic features when we speak about the use of articles. Though, again, let's not break the rules, which still exist. So, and of course, we need to be aware of the context of usage. So now come the examples, and let's practice. So it's task 5. There are some article excerpts. We will go one after, and we will analyze them one after another, but you have all of them in the handout. And we need, of course, to fill in the gaps with the articles where necessary. I would definitely say that we need to explain the use of articles. I have given there mark the articles used according to the rules of thumb. I don't mean like mark literally, right? But if you can explain the use of some articles according to the rules, like, for example, superlative form, like the most, no questions here. Try to underline such somehow, right? Or like at least to note such uses of articles as well, because it actually makes our task much easier when we can see some of the cases which are absolutely obvious, right? Because they are done according to the rules, right? It's also useful. So that's the first one. Again, don't forget about this idea of countable and countable nouns. Try to see which noun exactly, because there are very many noun phrases, right? So try to identify which noun does the article actually refer to. Again, let's not forget that we use no article only with those nouns which are uncountable. With countable nouns, we do use articles, right? You might try to avoid using them in your own texts by means of using some indefinite pronouns, for example, right? But you can hardly constantly do it, and that's why you still need to try to identify the right use of articles. It's always good to, of course, to check in the dictionary, right, whether the word is countable or uncountable, because I do actually recommend to use Collins Dictionary, Cambridge Online Dictionary, online dictionaries, right? Of course, Webster Dictionary. I love Webster Dictionary a lot, but for example, in some aspects, Collins and Cambridge, they are more like objective, I would put it like that. In terms of formal writing, I would definitely recommend them. Please pay your attention. There is one more aspect which I haven't mentioned yet. I did mention it at the beginning when I spoke about basic rules and about so-called sub-rules, right? But I did not kind of highlight it, and I would like to do it right now. It's not only about some set of rules, right? Like with geographical names and so on, but it's also about some set expressions. And in this case, for example, in this text, there is one sentence, because I did it on purpose. There is an example of such a set expression with an article, which can be used in academic writing, because again, our academic context is very restricted in terms of those set phrases that we use. And that's why it's definitely necessary, right, to be aware of the fact that there are some introductory phrases, for example, which are always used only with this or that article, and which functions as a chunk. Let's have a look at the first text, right? So here is the key. Demand forecasting. And if we look with you at the word forecasting, right, itself, it's generally, I think that you would definitely tell me that it can be kind of countable, because we speak about different types of forecasting, maybe because if there is demand forecasting, right, there can be some other forecast, right, type of forecasting. But the problem is that forecasting in this case is not a noun, it's a gerund. It's the form which is identical to the noun, but in fact, it's the form of a verb. And that's why forecast should be used in this case only as a verb, and forecasting, right, should be viewed as the form of the verb, but not a noun, like swimming, for example. So demand forecasting in this case doesn't take any article, is one of the manager's concern. Why the managers? In service supply chain management, because we have a particular area of management, right, which is considered here. Though, of course, it would be possible, is one of managers' concerns, but for me, it would be unclear, to be honest, because I speak exactly about service supply chain management, and that's why I would definitely use here the. Now, with accurate passenger flow forecasting, again, I don't interpret forecasting as a noun, because it's not a noun. And in this case, no article can be used before accurate. The station level service suppliers, as opposed to other suppliers, right? And then we have can make better service plans accordingly. Better service plans, just any article is impossible because we have better before the word plans. I mean, the is impossible. However, the existing forecasting model, in this case, the refers to the model, and we speak about one particular model which exists. And that's why the is necessary, cannot identify. And in this case, the different passenger flow at different types of stations. I understand a different future passenger flow. And in this case, I would definitely say that both options are possible, because a different future passenger flow as any different passenger, another, right, different future passenger flow. And at the same time, I can definitely say that it can be also interpreted as opposition of the existing passenger flow and the different future passenger flow at different types of stations. In this case, the author meant exactly what I have just said, right? So as opposed to the existing one, because with accurate passenger flow forecasting, right, the station level service suppliers can make better service plans accordingly. But this system, the existing one, it does not identify the different future passenger flow. And that's why I would definitely say that both are possible, but you see that the author uses here, right, the different future passenger flow, because not evidently, but the author introduces us into the context which requires comparison between the existing, right, flow and the future flow as predicted. Now, the next one, we have as a result, this is exactly that expression which I meant. These service supplies, because we have already mentioned them, can it make service plans according to the demands of different stations? I would definitely use here the because of this over phrase, but it's possible to use it to demands of different stations. It's also possible. We have already discussed that, right? And then in this article, we propose, and then here comes that knowledge that we want to share, right? They mention the subject of the article for the first time, and a deep learning architecture called deep SPF. So when we have, for example, we propose the deep learning architecture, it means that the authors have already mentioned it before. So the one that we both, the reader and the author, know, but the reader hasn't seen this term yet. The reader sees it for the first time. And that's why the author says a deep learning architecture as one of the types of deep learning architecture, right? And that's why A is required. But afterwards, further in the research, because this is just the introduction to the research, right, to the research paper. But further on, or to an article actually, further on, of course, it will be the deep SPF. And there are some expressions which we need to remember. As a result, is one of such expressions, it cannot be changed because it's fixed in the language. And that's why it can be given only like that. Like it's identical to the use of prepositions. Why do we say to my mind, for example, but we don't say we can say in my mind because the meaning will be completely different. And in this case, as the result, I understand it would be more logical, but no, it does not exist. I mean, in the English language, there is only one expression as a result. That is it. So that's one of the cases when we don't even need to think. We use it as it is. Likewise, let me give you an example, right? And will be used not the, because not the only example, but one of. The next part, right? The next excerpt. In this case, you see, we also propose the sliding long short-term memory neural networks, as opposed to the ones which can be of different kind, as an important component of our model. Because again, in this case, the author underlines that the sliding long short-term memory neural networks, right, are the only ones which can be a component of the model. and which actually define the efficiency of their model. That will be the meaning of the. In this case, the article will refer not to the memory, it will refer to networks. And that's why we either use no article here, sliding along short-term memory neural networks, which will be understandable for me, or we use the networks. Again, I do draw your attention to these facts, right? Again, in this case, the, right? It refers not to memory. It refers to the word networks. And that's why is literally impossible here. So if you suggest that we should use no article here, it's acceptable. But if you say that is possible here, no, it's not acceptable, because networks is plural. In the experiments of the Bayesian subway, deep SPF outperforms the baseline models in 3-time granularities, right? I would definitely say that in this case, all definite articles are like questionable, except for the first one. I mean, in the experiments, because they mean particular set of experiments, and that's why that is necessary. Then of the Bayesian subway, I would definitely say that it's part of like so-called rules of thumb or sub-rules as well, because the Moscow metro, right, the Bayesian subway. Again, in this case, we don't have to think, we need to know the rules. And then the baseline models, that's the comparison between the models which exist, the baseline models, right, and the one that they offer. And that's why we use articles that, again, in this case, maybe, right, I would put a question mark. Maybe it's possible not to use the, but the author wants to underline this comparison and this much higher performance of their model in comparison with the models which exist. Now let's move on. So we have here a comparison. I bet the majority of you have the comparison between variants of deep SPF, right, indicates that with the information of the station's functional types, deep SPF has strong robustness, right, when an abnormal situation happens. In fact, this is also questionable. I can only try to explain what the author meant. So a comparison means that there have been several comparisons, so maybe several sets of experiments, right, and several comparisons which they conducted, and that's why which they actually drew, and that is why a comparison is acceptable here. Though if you put in the comparison, it's also fine. I mean, in your own text of deep SPF, in this case, we speak about. Let's come back a little bit. Why not the deep SPF? Because here, a deep learning architecture, referred to the architecture, not to the phenomenon, which is called deep SPF, because deep SPF is the notion. And in this case, it's like abstract notion. And that's why they use it further on without any article, because they use this architecture, and it would be the architecture further on. But when they use deep SPF, they don't use any article, because it's variants of deep SPF, right? The variants of this technology in general. So indicates that with the information of stations functional types, DPSPF has strong robustness and so on. The information, they did kind of acquire specific types of information. And in this case, we speak, they mean exactly the information of stations functional types. And we have of phrase, and let's not forget that information is uncountable. That's why no other articles are possible, right? And then an abnormal situation, I understand when you use here the abnormal situation, right? Because in this case, you kind of underline that there are normal situations and abnormal, but they meant that any abnormal situation happens. And that's why they used actually here N, because sometimes the explanation is much more simple than we can imagine. And in this case, it's just any situation possible, right? And there is not much depth in that. So if we speak with you about the word architecture, the word architecture has actually, again, several meanings, because the word architecture, and in this case, it's not always, yes, relatable. I mean, even dictionaries, which I have already mentioned, are not always relatable, because in fact, in this case, they use the word architecture in the meaning of a kind of system, right? The structure. And in this case, it can be countable. And of course, architecture as art, as like art of planning and designing and constructing buildings, right? It's definitely uncountable. And even when we speak about the style, the design again, right, it's uncountable. But I would definitely say that in this case, it is used as, how to put it, as one of the systems that exists. And that's why they use it as a countable noun. I would not say that it's regular usage. And that's why when you write your own text, be aware of the fact that it can be also interpreted, right, in different ways. In this case, they used actually a certain N architecture, right? At first, by the way, I also didn't at once get why N architecture, but then as the source was Harvard University Journal, right? I have absolutely no doubts that the editors, right, did actually approve of that. Let's move on. We have actually here task 6. Let me comment on that. This is exactly the text which contains that emotional coloring, which is expressed by means of articles. And again, there are some articles which are also used as according to the rules of thumb or in some set expression. First one, the federal government. It's a rule, right? We do use when we speak about various organizations, right? And when we use the words like federal, supreme, and so on, yes, we do use the federal government. Then, a facially neutral country-targeted travel ban. It refers to the word ban, right? I mean, this air, we understand it. And it implements any ban. That's what is meant by this air, right? Actually, this is an article on research, which is very emotional. And if you read the whole text of the article, you will understand what I mean. But even by this introduction, right, we can clearly see how emotional this author is, because this air underlines, it emphasizes, right, under any circumstances, right, what would happen, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the functions of articles, because articles can make any text emotional. Yes, they can. And it's so it's absolutely amazing. How even such tiny words, just one letter, can change the interpretation of the context. Now, so does it matter that it closely follows and invokes the same? That's exactly the case when I say, when I usually say, you don't have to think, you have just to put the same, the following, right? The whole. In this case, it's a set combination, article plus the. they are never used differently. It's a chunk, you need to remember them. And in this case, rules are very, very useful and helpful. So two simile bands, and this is, by the way, one of the those proofs that actually ban is countable, both enjoined on establishment clause grounds. Why no article here? Because we speak here actually this gap, right? It refers to the word grounds, which is countable, which means like foundations. And in this case, establishment clause is just a determiner for this noun, which is plural. And that's why we actually don't need any article, because with the plural article, we cannot use it. And the author doesn't want to underline on which exactly grounds, right? This would be overemphasizing already. What if this what if structure is highly emotional, and then it is also like enhanced by a law, any law, like some law permitting non-unanimous jury verdicts 76 years after adopting it for racist reasons. And you understand what these emotions are driven by, right? Then, or if Texas's redistricting maps draw partly on all the maps that a court included with were unconstitutional. A court, because some court is meant, not court as an institution, but a court as a certain number of jurists, right? Who, like, for example, made that decision. Yes, but it might be not only one law. Don't forget that in the states, every state has its own law. On the one hand, on the other hand, there are very many law issues, right, which are connected to the problem of racism, for example, and so on. And that's why she meant that in the bulk of laws, right, any law, reaffirming any law which permits non-unanimous jury verdicts, because there can be several laws of the kind. There not can be, but there are several laws of the kind. And that's why in this case, again, don't forget about this emotional coloring that I have already mentioned. She doesn't speak about a particular law. She speaks about an imaginary situation, what if. And that's why the meaning any or some is prevailing there. And as this is the domineering meaning, right? A is the article which she uses. Again, in another context, if you use there, the meaning will change completely, because in this case, the situation would be not an imaginary one, but a particular one. But she speaks, I mean, the author is, it's a female author, that's why I use she, because I read the whole article. And she speaks about an imaginary situation in which any law could act like that. What if Louisiana invokes neutral reasons? It 76 years after adopting it for racist reasons, right? I mean, it meaning non-unanimous, unanimous jury verdicts. It refers to the unanimous jury verdicts, but a law refers to what if Louisiana invokes neutral reasons for reaffirming a law, so one of those laws, and that is it. And in this case, again, I aim not at giving you some ready-made recipes. We are analyzing the existing article. So this is the article which exists. And our task is to understand what is the interpretation of this text in terms of the articles which are used. And that's why if we have the law, it means that there was only one law, which was actually passed 76 years ago, right? And if this law is reaffirmed, this is another story. But she speaks about a set of laws, and one of them can be reaffirmed. That's what is meant. And then further on, it's, again, let's not forget that this is one text, right, which is split into parts. And that's why all these constructions which are used further on, they are like parallel, they are identical, and they enhance this meaning, this message which is behind them. And that's why, or if Texas and so on at a court concluded were unconstitutional, right? Or if a city closes pools ostensibly for safety and cost reasons, again, a court, a city, a law. meaning that there can be an imaginary situation in which any of these factors could be activated, right, at a certain moment of time. And it underlines that, first of all, that the situation is imaginary. Second of all, that still, technically, theoretically, it's possible. And then actually, that's why this series, right, is so very important here, because it like unites the text and creates the context for the message. Again, I'm very sorry, it can be complicated right now, but if you further on read the texts and pay attention to those minor details, right, to those minor words, and try to understand what way they change the meaning, it might improve greatly your skills and get you more and more interested in the English language. That's the aim, because again, we have now kind of an introductory session. Now, just to see what way articles work in the English language and to get a bit more experience. Now, and the final passage here, right? Judging from the majority. Again, we never use these words without the word the majority, the minority. No, it's possible, but the way to say a minority, but the majority. It's kind of, again, a set combination, which we can't use. And then the Supreme Court's answer resembles a shrug. And this is what I love immensely. A shrug, like, that's a shrug, right? Which means like, makes it like questionable. And then the past. We always speak about the past, the present, and the future using article the. At this emotional point, I would like to finish, right? And kind of draw the line, the strategies, actually. If we speak about the strategies, right, of course, the first thing to identify is whether the noun is countable or uncountable. And this is the first thing to remember, because if we identify the noun as an uncountable one, of course, we at once just stop thinking about a and n, and we either use no article or that. And of course, bearing in mind, just taking into consideration what we have already done, right, and the possible mistakes that we might make, it's necessary to say, I would say that not only is it necessary to identify whether the noun is countable or not, first and foremost, it is necessary to identify which noun does the article refer to, because noun phrases, nominal phrases, right, are so very characteristic and popular in academic context. Now, if the noun is definite, that's the other question that you have to ask yourself. And the noun is definite, at least in these 5 situations, right? When the object has already been mentioned, if the object is unique or represents a certain category of things like their computer, right? When the context makes it obvious, and that's what we've been doing with you today. We've been struggling with the context, and you definitely showed your skills in thinking and critical evaluation of the context from different points of view. And extra information, of course, makes it different, and ranking, like the first, the second, right, and so on. And I would definitely ask you right now to help me make a conclusion, or the conclusion, which is based on everything that we have already discussed with you during the session. For me, articles are a real challenge, but it's possible to understand what way to use them in a particular context, as they actually help us to create meaning and get the message across. And I think that this is one more case. However, they are manageable. You see, very often I can hear, and I myself think that it's kind of this certain feeling, right? Like intuition. In fact, it's not intuition. In fact, it's our linguistic experience. We feel it because we've seen it many times, because we've like tasted it, right? We've pronounced it so very many, we've thought it over many times. And that's what develops our, what we call sometimes linguistic intuition. I call it linguistic experience. We need a little bit of chaos in the English language. And these are the articles. On the one hand, on the other hand, they allow us creativity. And that's why let's be creative and let's tell our own stories, even in academic writing. And let's be creative. But not over creative, of course. So here are the references. I do recommend, for example, one of the grammar books which I like and which, in my opinion, which is really helpful, because I would definitely recommend, for example, one of the grammar books, which is Cambridge for English language teachers. Surprisingly, and the author is Martin Parrott, which is very easy to remember, Parrott with double R and double T. And to add to the references which I have already given, these are online resources. I think that this is one of the best textbooks. Macmillan Advanced Grammar is also a very good book, which I would definitely recommend as the book which is relevant to academic context as well. And I think that these two books, just again, not to overload you with the information, they are absolutely helpful in terms of understanding articles. But with articles, really, it was absolutely true to say that the more we read, right, and the more we write in English, the more experience like you have, the better. I was really happy to work with you tonight, and thanks a lot and have a nice evening.